What's up, Gestalt Education Nation? Today's episode is brought to you by The Payday Practice and our good friends Jeff Langmaid and Jason Deach.
So how would Seth Gooden, Gary Vee, and Tim Ferriss create a chiropractic practice? The answer is in this book right here. So our good friends Jeff Langmaid and Jason Deach, they created the Payday Practice to basically show you how you cover your monthly expenses in one day every month. Guaranteed. Generating monthly recurring revenue in your practice can create financial freedom, eliminate chronic financial stress, and turn the first day of each month from damn, it's time to start over to payday.
Get a free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com. The Payday Practice will show you the exact step-by-step process that you can use to generate monthly recurring revenue in your practice. Get your free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gestalt Education Show. We kind of took our show outside today, Brett, so we have a super special guest with us today, Brad Scott. And so, Brad, you're the Major League Strength Conditioning Coordinator here for the Atlanta Braves. You're a World Series champion. Congratulations. And then also, you and Brett have kind of intertwined themselves together for the last couple of years. So how'd you guys meet, Brett, and where did it all start?
I think Andrew Hauser had originally brought us together when he was with the Braves, and then we had a coffee with Andrew that day at the stadium, I remember, and then I met for coffee with you in St. Louis outside of that too. And I remember asking Andrew also for our World Pitching Congress, who does he think's one of the top people in the strength and conditioning world in the world of baseball, and he didn't even think of it. He said Brad Scott.
Beautiful. So talk us through where did the infatuation with baseball maybe start, or maybe it was strength and conditioning first, but what keeps you going and what keeps you grinding through all this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Secondly, I think I've just always been very passionate about strength and conditioning, even such a young age. I was the youngest of 5 kids and trying to keep up with my older brothers. I didn't play baseball per se. I was a wrestler, played lacrosse, but we had a powerlifting team in high school, so that's what kind of started my exercise science kind of infatuation. And then went to school, ended up studying exercise science. It became easy to me. I was working in a gym all through college, and then got an internship at Northeastern University, and that's where it really exploded. At the time, the head guy had lost his assistant, and next thing you know, I'm running 8 teams, and I'm kind of put it with a lot of responsibility, and I absolutely loved it. And that was 20-something years ago now. That was about 23 years ago. And from there, I've just started to continue to kind of build, and I was in college sports for 16 years before switching over to MLB. But I think that time period of being a generalist and having to work with a number of different head coaches, I would have over 300 athletes come through a weight room, and at one point it was just myself. So I would train 10 teams in a day, and I really think that's what accelerated my learning curve and accelerated just my passion for just being and working with athletes of all kind of shapes and sizes and trying to figure out answers to questions that kept coming up over and over again.
It kind of answers the question really well too, because most people haven't had that many reps before they get into maybe a minor league system or something like that. So I'm sure that had to influence you huge.
Yeah, I think I was a little non-traditionalist in that I didn't come up through the minor leagues. However, I was still working in performance and development.
Sure.
And so you're working with overhead athletes, such as you're still working with baseball in the college sector. You're still working with volleyball players. You're working with rotational athletes in golf and tennis and so on and so forth. And then you're also having to actually really understand energy system training when you're working with college soccer players and working with men's basketball. So, and then you start to kind of put these things together and really start to run little pilot experiments on each team and see what actually works. Like, hey, I just read this research paper. Let me try this with this team because I think it can actually happen. And then what are the results? And then how do you kind of steer that into the next team and the next team? And it starts to snowball. And having all those reps and that trial and error and the opportunity to do it with somewhat of a low cost. Like, you can't take a risk on a $4 or $5 million sign. Mm-hmm. And so you almost have to play it overly safe. And I think on my end, I was able to kind of get a lot of reps and fail a lot, but also succeed a lot. And that kind of honed where I'm at today, I think.
How do you deal with, because a lot of these guys now, whether it's off season or even during the season, they'll have, private, they're getting private advice, let's just say, from a lot of different areas. How do you get them bought into your program? How do you get them, how do you keep them within the team? Just because I know it's a lot easier to control if they're doing things within the team.
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's how do I become an ally with their trainer? That person has a skill set that this player obviously finds valuable. So it's up to me to kind of work with that trainer and find out, hey, you know what? This guy really values what you say. And you obviously make him feel really good heading into spring training, and he trusts you. So how do I kind of understand what you're programming for that person? Yeah. And then I can leverage that because I actually have an idea of what he's got and what he has done coming into spring training. And then we can start to fill in the gaps. We now have an established trust with myself and that new player coming in. And then we can start to snowball things. And I'll just say, like, hey, listen, I'm here to support you ultimately. And you are kind of the owner of your own destiny. And if you're a guy that's kind of bounced around with different organizations, I get why you have an outside guy.
Right.
Because you are a professional and you're taking your health seriously. So how do I hold you accountable and help coach you towards your program? And that's kind of how I try to play that. And I think it's worked really well because now you come alongside a guy versus trying to say, hey, you have to do our program. And that really doesn't work. And I think that comes back to being very open-minded and kind of what we just discussed, right? Like when I was working with a multitude of different sports, I saw a multitude of things work with different athletes at different ages. And so now coming back into that, now I can kind of say, oh, I can see where this trainer is coming from, working with this guy. Perfect. That makes total sense. Let's continue to run with it. And I know over time, if there's little things that we need to kind of plug some holes in that maybe that trainer hasn't addressed, then we're over time and playing that long game, we're going to get there eventually. But if I try to microwave my approach, then nothing's going to taste good and it's never going to last.
Sure. What about, you kind of mentioned it, but what's that transition look like starting spring training and then throughout the season? What did kind of your first couple weeks getting to know the new players and stuff like that look like?
Yeah, I think it's one, establishing a relationship with those guys. Again, kind of getting to know who they are as a person first. And then obviously within baseball, seeing what their injury history is, what have they been doing during the off season. The big thing that I think presents itself as possible, I just kind of get aware of it, is how much running have you done? I don't care how strong you are coming into spring training. I want to know how many times have you been on the bags, what's your sprint program look like? Because we know from a position player standpoint that, we don't want you to pull a hammy. And so that's really what I'm concerned about. And so if I go back and say I'm looking at a trainer and I'm saying, hey, this is the space that this guy trains out of, and they've only been running on a treadmill or they only been doing acceleration work and it's only a 20-yard stretch of turf that this person has in their facility, that makes me a little worried. So to me, you get injured sprinting, so we need to make sure that we have the coordination pattern of sprinting, we have the mechanics to run correctly, and then we can kind of slowly build their workloads up and kind of micro-dose those sprint sessions into their warm-ups before they head out onto the field. So that's kind of what I look at from that perspective.
One of the big injuries that is, since the beginning of time that have plagued baseball players is an oblique injury. So oblique injuries, hamstring injuries, what are the Atlanta Braves doing to try to safeguard yourself against these kind of nuisance injuries?
Yeah, I think one of the things that when you look at it from a running volume standpoint, having a polarized approach and a holistic approach. And what I mean by a polarized approach is when you look at some of the top sprinters, there's going to be days when you are required to sprint incredibly fast.
Right.
And that is kind of like, hey, we're turning up the engine and you're going to run down the drag strip. And there's other days where we're going to go out for a cruise and kind of do more of our tempo work, more of our aerobic work, and on the lower end of things. So you should be under 70%. It should look slow. It should be recovery. And it's an opportunity to kind of fine-tune and build some resilience in that tissue. And then if you're looking at kind of creating an over-saturation or over-oxygenation effect, you can do that. When you look at kind of applying that same principle, oblique injuries, we'll do like what we call an aerobic med ball series where we're doing, a 6-pound Dynamax ball And we're actually going through and creating up to 200, 300 throws, but it's at a low level and continuing to build capacity within that tissue. I think everyone always wants to look, yes, we want to create more power, and that's a part of the program, but keep your high days very, very high and keep your low days very, very low. And then systematize that and talk to the hitting coaches, talk to the pitching coaches. What's the volume of this guy? How are we starting to build that particular person up? And then we can layer everything to be a high day collectively in the weight room, high day collectively out on the mound or on the field, and then start to kind of make sure that we have the recovery days that we need.
Right. And probably even a more expensive injury would be the UCL injury. So what do you guys do, if anything? Is there any kind of preventative program with your pitchers to work with that, or is it more of it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen, or what's your current take on the UCL epidemic?
I think with UCL injuries, it comes back to one: what is are you just do you have general strength overall? And then what are you doing as you're kind of developing your velo and kind of putting things together? So when we look at it, we say, does this person have a good training protocol? Are they getting into the gym? Do they have a good warm-up routine? Do they have the prerequisite ranges of motion? Is there anything that's like kind of flagging an injury per se? Can we start there? Then do we have an arm care program? And when I look at arm care, yes, we have dedicated arm care specific to kind of scapular, thoracic, and arm health. But then also we're looking at like a total body holistic approach to like, are you moving well? And then are you adding weights and you're kind of getting stronger overall, and then kind of putting it together. If you're always doing like medium work, then you never really recover. So kind of layering a lot of, it sounds kind of cliche, but again, it's just being very hyper organized and aware of all of the total stresses that are going through the body, and then being able to manage those stresses and then make sure we account for that, whether it's soft tissue and recovery aspect of it, some dry needling, those types of things to help prevent any issues from popping up. But it's also, again, putting together, are you getting in the gym? Are your legs strong? Are you sequencing correctly? All of those things, it's so multifactorial to UCL wear and tear. And then also looking at kind of like their pitch count and their workload and where things are, and actually talking to the person and building a relationship with them where they are they're understanding and vulnerable to you of, hey, you know what, something doesn't feel right, and they're okay saying that and addressing that. Okay. And I think that's as equally important as well.
Rapport.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think? What are the keys to integrating well within the team? So obviously you're in strength and conditioning, but you're having to deal with the trainers, you're working with the orthopedist, you're working with the hitting and pitching coaches. So, and Andrew used to always brag about your ability to do this well also. So what are the keys to allow, that to kind of naturally occur? Because with a lot of teams, everyone's kind of on a silo, not everyone's got all the oars facing the same direction. So what are some of the things that have made you guys successful in being able to integrate well within each other?
I think, one, we have a really good staff, and it first starts off with the character of the people that we have. There's no one that has their own agenda in mind. It's always what is going to be best for the player, and how do we leverage each other's strengths to collaborate and work collectively to solve the problem for the player's benefit.
Right.
And really, like, people say that, but it starts with like, hey, having breakfast with guys in the morning, we go down and, you see another coach, grab some breakfast with them, talk about anything other than baseball sometimes, just like be a human being and develop a relationship with people. And then also like give and take a little bit, right? Like I just gave a coaching book to one of our hitting coaches, and he and I are going to discuss it on Thursday and grab some breakfast and kind of go over some talking points. But the only reason I knew that book was going to be kind of an appropriate for him was what we've talked about, and he's writing a chapter for another book, and it's just like, hey, this may help you. Like, here, try it, So I think it's a matter of like allowing things to be organic. I think it's also a matter of the people that come into the clubhouse, and they're very high character people that have your best interest in mind, and that secures a level of trust and ultimately a level of vulnerability, because when you have good vulnerability, you actually have trust within the organization, and therefore you can say, I don't know, and your job's not on the line, and that's a big thing that security I don't think most people have in any job. I think that's kind of some of the secret sauce that people are trying to develop, and that culture is formed organically. It's not something that you can just say, hey, we're going to act like
today
this.
we're going to give a speech. And
like everyone's going to get behind it. It doesn't work that way.
Talk to me about, you always talk about like when they go on a run, they win a World Series, which we'll get to that. Were you guys building camaraderie as a staff as you guys were getting in October last year? Could you almost like feel the momentum building even with you guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I'd say back in 2018 was the first time I remember walking into our clubhouse and being like, man, something's different. Like, this group is special. And we were still in Disney, and it was, February at this point, and we were like, man, like this, we got a good club. And then to see, some of our younger guys continue to matriculate and improve and get better, and then, surprise some people with our results. And then last year, you're coming into October and you're like, okay, we did it. But we're a really good ball club, and you have that momentum, and you have those key games that bring everybody together. They come from behinds, the walk-offs, the things that really unite a team. And it's a very, very long season, but those moments keep you going. Those moments get you up early. Those moments keep you up at night when you're trying to find a solution for the next win and the next opportunity. And in October, that last month of the season, I don't think really, when you're going into a World Series run, your days, I don't think people understand, like us as a staff, we're getting there at noon, and we're working with all of our rehab players for a game that starts at 8 o'clock at night. That's going to be a 4-hour game where you're hanging on every single pitch and every call, and you're just like, the amount of stress, it's like your resting heart rate is sitting there in zone 2, like 150, just kind of like hanging out. And then there's this massive decompression after the game, but you're still wound up and you can't go to bed, and you repeat that for literally a month straight. And I remember, like, you've got family, you've got all these outside things that you're trying to battle from a personal standpoint. I don't mean battle, it's probably not the right word, but you're in the middle of a battle, right, on the field.
There you go.
And then you're also trying to spend time with family and enjoy that moment that may never come around again. So there's a lot on your plate. And
there's a lot of pressure on you guys too. I mean, 'cause you need your best players to be out there, and no one ever talks about that. But I mean, that's a lot of pressure. That's a big burden for you guys to bear, really.
Yeah, like, you got to be the best version of yourself as a coach and practitioner to allow them to be the best version of themselves, because they're going to be under the spotlight, and they want to rise to the occasion because they've been dreaming about that moment since they were little kids, just as you have.
And in 2018, what was it about that group of guys? Like, what can you? I know some of it's intangible, but what are some of the qualities that you start to see developing to know that it's a special group of guys?
I think, I recently read it in a chapter about, like, camaraderie. And it's like, you started seeing, like, the fist pumps come through that were just organic. Like, you're walking down the hall, and it's like, I don't think anybody walks down the hall in our clubhouse and doesn't give somebody, like, a hello or a little fist pump or a little sign that they're there and they're a piece of, who we are.
Big old chest bumping.
Yeah, or like, just those things that constantly kind of happen over time that you can't put your, like, it just...
Well, because you like each other when you're doing that. You don't do that to some dude you don't like.
Yeah, and it's just like, hey, man, I got you. I recognize you. Like, how's your day going? What's the best part of your day? Like, those are the questions that happen, and it's because people are really interested in what's going on,
And then how do you deal with, we know now, like, how important sleep is, especially for our athletes. How do you deal with the baseball schedule's insane? I mean, these guys come out the field, they're all geeked up. They might not even get back to the hotel till midnight. How do you even, like, attempt to start to work on sleep patterning with these professional athletes, especially the baseball athlete, who they start their games, typically so late?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part, honestly. I think sleep is obviously, and other lifestyle factors, is such a instrumental part of our recovery. And so again, it's kind of looking at what is this person's home life like? A lot of times these young guys are starting families. They're starting to kind of think about contracts, depending upon where they are in their career. And then just the schedule itself. So some guys actually might get better sleep when they're on the road because their family's not, with them, and they can kind of catch up, and maybe they have a little bit of time they can train a little bit better on the road. We have breakfast at the hotel for our guys, so it allows guys to get up, get a good quality meal in, and then maybe go back to bed for a little bit and kind of get that nap and kind of get an established routine. And then just talking to them a little bit again, like, how do you unwind for the game? And some of the guys stick around the clubhouse after a game, and they share the responsibility and the load with each other. So one guy isn't now, hey, like, I didn't pitch very well, I gave up a few runs. That guy's not carrying that burden home with him and stewing at night, because he's got the support system of his teammates and the other guys in the bullpen that maybe they're sitting around afterwards, after the game, and talking it through, like, hey, you know what, this is what you could have done a little bit differently. Hey, I had this situation, here's how I went with it. And becomes kind of this organic support group. So now that guy's night is shared by everybody, and he's been heard, and he's kind of problem solved collectively with his teammates, so that allows him to go home and sleep a little bit better at night. And I don't think that stuff has to come naturally, and you can't just say, like, hey, stick around after the game. But that has an impact on his sleep, because his mental health is going to improve his sleep, and so on and so forth.
As time's evolved, you have a couple different camps. You have a camp that believes that every professional athlete can basically be trained relatively the same because of fundamental movements that we have to do in all these sports. And you have another camp that thinks we need, more specialized training. One, which camp are you in? And the second part of that question will be, what is unique to baseball that you need to be working with that maybe isn't true for other sports?
Yeah, I think how do you be human specific before you be sports specific? So I don't know if I want to ever identify with a camp per se. I just want to make sure that I have the tools and I'm well-rounded enough as a coach to be able to understand, like, hey, you know what do we know from a health standpoint that we need to address? Because if you start robbing health for performance, eventually it's a ticking time bomb. So how do we look at human performance and then sport performance, and kind of working back and forth along that?
Right.
And then within regards to baseball, being at this level, you have to be able to train enough. It's like your best workout is the one that allows you to work out tomorrow, and it allows you to be the best version of yourself when you step out on the field at 7 o'clock at night.
Right.
You have to keep that at the forefront of your mind when you're working with somebody. And you have to respect that person's what they enjoy doing about training. And then it's up to me as a coach of the art of it to blend the natural principles of strength and conditioning that will fit with that particular player to be the best version of themselves. So I might have one guy that's like, hey, you know what? Right before the game, I like deadlifting. Let's throw on 315. I'm going to get a couple of reps, and we're going to do an explosive workout right before he goes out. And I have another guy that comes in, and he only wants to do band work. He doesn't like to feel tight. So I need to kind of accelerate what's going to make him feel really good going out onto the game.
You need to be a chameleon, kind of meet them where they are.
Exactly. And that's how you get buy-in. And I think that's how the ultimate goal is to continue to have them come in, and it's a positive place that they always feel good and better leaving, because that's going to transcend out onto the field.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of, again, like the ultimate goal is how do I set them up for success, and success from a health standpoint, success from a performance standpoint, and then unique to baseball is like, what makes them really good at their particular sport, and how do I either plug in the gaps that the sport has an adaptation element to it, and either that's going to push them into more of the performance side and maybe away from the health side of things, that maybe I have to steer them back within the normal ranges. And then there's also that part of it that I can, from the health standpoint, of saying, hey, we can push these aspects, that whether it's strength, power, speed, more mobility, ranges, access to patterns that are going to help accelerate the performance side of things.
It's kind of interesting because a lot of people don't realize, you'll know, but spring training was originally devised because these players were working a normal job just like everybody else, and then they would have to get in shape to play baseball. So they would show up in Florida or wherever and get themselves into shape. Now these players, they show up to spring training and they're probably like in amazing shape. So, again, like, what do you do to carry that on? How much does it change, like, once the season starts and things like that?
Well, coming into spring training, they're their training volume is really, really high, but their baseball volume is very, very low.
Right.
So I have to dial down the training mode and say, hey, you got to go be a baseball player today. So you have to have kind of a slow approach to what you're doing, and also educate the player and saying like, hey, you kind of came into it at a peak, and now let's kind of keep you going, but just drop off your volume quite a bit, because the baseball volume, we need to start to build that up. And I think, again, that's working back with the position coaches and saying, hey, like, how much has so-and-so been in the cage? What kind of swings? Like, how is he doing? Is he trying to fix something that now his workload and that coach has a skill-specific need that he's going to have to increase his volume on? Great. Now I need to know I can dial my volume back, because it's ultimately what that preparation of skill development is going to determine who makes the roster as well. So it's that combination of, you don't want a guy to pull an oblique in the cage, kind of building up because he's taking 300 hacks, and then all of a sudden you're throwing 300 med balls on the same day, and then he's got to go back and do that. So it's, again, having that open communication across the board. It's also kind of understanding, like, yes, you're in a peaking phase, so you're lifting really, really heavy, and you're sprinting really, really fast, and we need to keep all of that in mind. But now let's kind of start to dial down our overall volume, and even maybe dial down our intensity just a little bit, because the intensity on the field is going to start to ramp up.
Right.
And that's really what matters as we start to go through. And then within our screening, we're kind of looking at, are there any red flags that we need to be aware of, as a guy starting to kind of build his volume. And that kind of comes in time and with reps.
Mm-hmm. What about, when you have like a controversial topic like weighted balls, for example, let's just say, would you ever even dip your toe into that shark-infested water, or do you just kind of let the player tell you what their preference is? If they're already in a program that's utilizing that, do you try to carry that on, or is that just something you're not going to go to?
I think, honestly, with weighted balls, it's obviously such a hot topic. I think it comes back to, is this person, are they being coached correctly?
Right.
Doing the program, or are they cherry picking the program and not being coached appropriately, not being aware of what their overall volume is, and do they even have the structural integrity to meet the demands of the weighted ball program? So it's kind of like, that's like the special sauce, but like, have you done all the general things? Like, that's the tip of the pyramid.
Right.
If you don't have a solid foundation of strength and mobility and sequencing, and then you start to add on kind of this, obviously the weighted ball program and the volume of throwing on top of that, I think that's kind of a recipe for disaster. But I would say, if you have the foundation in place, it's like anything. It's basic principles of overload and underload. It's basic principles of program design, and it has to fit biomechanically with who you are, and it has to fit into your overall program. It can't be something that you're where I see people get into trouble, again, is they cherry pick certain exercises. They don't really have the understanding of why that exercise fits, and then they're not being coached appropriately when they're actually carrying out the exercise. Or a lot of times too, the intent behind the player is like a half-ass throw with these things. It's like, you have to have some solid intent and be in the right mindset when you're going into it, right? Like, if I'm going to go and do a max effort deadlift, I got to get my mind right and make sure that I'm in a good place and I have a solid warm-up before that happens. It's the same thing going into a heavy weighted ball program. If I don't have a solid warm-up, if I don't have things activated, if I'm not feeling correctly, and then I go in that with just kind of half-ass intent, like, you're going to get hurt.
Right.
So let's just kind of make sure we kind of get that out of the way,
Well said. How do you reconcile Nate with the Diamondbacks? He always brings up a good point. He always says that rule number one in strength conditioning for all professional athletes, with baseball athletes too, don't blow an athlete up, so don't get someone hurt. So let's just say some guy wants to, deadlift 315 pounds before they go start. Are you always nervous? I've
had some nervous moments, let me tell you. Yeah.
Because it's like right on the edge, because you're needing to push some limits, but then also we don't want to have someone put on the injured list because of their training program.
Exactly. And so it's, again, kind of working back and forth with that program. One thing that we try to do is, I'd say, if we look at things in a 3-day series, what I personally encourage guys to do is the first day of a series, like come in and just move. Let's sprint. Let's throw some med balls. Let's kind of do a good routine that makes you feel that you've got kind of your prehab exercise in. Yeah, like you feel good. Especially in an away game, like you're sleeping in a new bed. You probably got in pretty late. Some of our arrivals are 4 a.m.
Oof.
And then you got to turn around and come back to the field. So let's just get your body prepared to feel good for the day. The second day of a series, now you kind of played a game. You've kind of been accustomed. You're not necessarily dehydrated anymore. I don't know if that's the right. I always think about that like in the back of my head with flying. Now let's come in. Let's get a really good quality training session in. And then the third day, generally it's a day game, so it kind of goes back to what do you need from us to get ready for that game. And what it starts to follow is you kind of have a medium day at day one, then you have kind of a higher stress day on day two, and then you have somewhat of a lower stress day on day three. And the game somewhat stays stagnant, and it also allows you to kind of have some fluid periodization within, like, hey, we got in super late, so let's make these kind of adjustments, but we're still keeping the principles true to what we're doing.
I think that makes a lot of sense because in all professional sports, sometimes like with the teams you see, the struggle is there's no real plan for the player. Like the player can come in, they're almost like ordering a la carte off a menu on what they want that day, which that people have had success doing that, but I also think sometimes people just need some direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're alluding to by what you just said.
Exactly. I think, you're working with the player to give direction, but the direction always comes back to like, what adaptation are you seeking? What principles are proposed to elicit that adaptation, and then what fits within the real world of where we are.
Right.
Whether, at this time in the season, what was, we just came off of a double header, and then you're going to go into the next day. Like, there's got to have some recovery built in where we make some adjustments. But again, it's coming up alongside the player and saying, hey, listen, here's what I got planned for you. How you feeling today? There's your RPE. You're starting to do your intake and your wellness intake right there with the conversation. Here's what I had outlined. What are you thinking? Here's kind of what the weight room offers when we're on the road, because there's certain things that we can and can't do when we're home versus on the road. And then, cool. That, like, we good with that? Great. Now let's roll with it. And so now it's kind of that fluid periodization where you're still following the principles, but now you're working collectively with what's the state of the athlete right now, and then what's the state of kind of where we are in terms of that point in the season, where we are in terms of travel-wise, and then kind of rolling collectively with that.
You have the ability to call an audible if you need it.
Exactly. Nothing is linear, and somehow we always want it to be, but there's this constant fluctuation that we need to have and be aware of and appreciate, and if we appreciate and have that awareness, then we can address it.
Besides rapport, when you're dealing with a difficult personality, maybe they've done it one way forever, and let's just say that in the back of your mind, you're like, this is destructive. So how do you, because like we were saying before, you're going to live with some stuff you might not like, but when you're like, okay, this is a problem. What's that?
That's the toughest one, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that seems to be sometimes like the aging athlete, right? The guy that's had a very long, successful career and then comes in and maybe doesn't, wants to just lift heavy or doesn't really want to warm up appropriately, or that's always the one that you got to kind of come alongside. And maybe you're saying, he comes up to you or you go up to him and are like, hey, what do you got today? Because he doesn't, you can't, every time you write a plan, it's always like the plan goes out the window because he wants to do what he wants to do. Yes. So it's kind of like, hey, what do you got today? Okay. All right. That sounds good. What about if we mix in some of these? But that's honestly, those are the hard guys,
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't have too many of those. You might have a couple, one or two a year.
Thankfully.
And those are like the ones that you're like, whew, okay, I dodged a bullet a little bit on that one. Like I got to figure out, and that's kind of, again, comes back to the communication of the coaching side of it.
Yeah.
You have to be really knowledgeable on the technical aspect of things, but that's where coming back and having some social skills and social awareness, and also talking to some of the the position coaches. And a lot of times that guy is doing the same across the entire organization.
For everybody. Oh, for sure.
So maybe somebody, the position coach has maybe been able to click with him a little bit better, So how do you kind of find that out? And then now you've kind of built some common language to come back and maybe address some things in the weight room.
And baseball players are just such creatures of habit, aren't they? I mean, it is insane as far as like rituals, whether it's before an at bat or pitching. I mean, it's really it was always a struggle for me to deal with those things, because if one thing goes wrong in that little ritual, then they can blow up.
Yeah, they're very kind of process oriented and very driven. And I would say honestly though too is the guys that have the most success are the same guy every day.
Right, good point.
And there's so much variability in the game itself that ritual is basically how they get into the zone. That's the one thing that they can control. So you have to respect that and foster what makes that guy feel really good. And then also, I think working conjunctively or collaboratively with sports science or sports performance and mental performance, and saying like, does this guy have the tools to get back into the zone if the wheels fall off on his daily rituals?
Right.
So it's kind of working back and forth to make sure that guy has the same process each day that kind of makes him feel good and gets him right, because there's the travel, there's the lack of sleep, there's the pressures of having to perform, there's the pressures of where am I, is it a contract year, like all those things are layers to what that person's going through.
And all the attention they start to get.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
Difficult. Beautiful. We've kind of hit our quota. We got to get him back so we can get back to training and get ready for game day, right? So
yeah, exactly.
So we really appreciate you sitting down with us. I think it was some great insight. I've heard a lot about you. It's beautiful to meet you. So we thank you for sitting down. And any last comments, Brett?
No, just good luck. Congratulations on last year, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me on. I appreciate
Beautiful.
it.
All right, man.
Alrighty.
Take care.
Thank
Later.
you. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Gestalt Education Show. If you liked it, share it, subscribe to it, send it to your friends, send it to someone that needs to hear this message. We really want everyone to be able to tune in and get the best clinical advice that they can, which we're hoping that we're giving to you with these special guests. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or if you have any suggestions on upcoming conversations, let us know. For a list of our upcoming courses, we're adding them all the dang time. So go to gestaltedu.com, click on courses, and they'll all be right there for you. All right, have a good day.